Hello and welcome to the Create Connects information session for funding applications in the priority area of people with disability and or who are deaf. Today's session is designed to provide advice from someone who has been through the application process and successfully funded. My name is Kat and I'm a manager in the Arts and Cultural Funding team from Create New South Wales, and I'll be facilitating today's session. We'd like to start by acknowledging Aboriginal people across the state and their continued connection to their lands, waters and culture. We respect elders past and present and the role that Aboriginal artists play in contributing to their culture. In terms of what we'll be covering today, we'll have a look at an overview of Create New South Wales funding opportunities, provide you with tips on how to write a strong application, and we'll meet with successful applicants from a previous funding round with a focus on accessibility. Create New South Wales Arts and Cultural Funding Program provides funding opportunities for arts and cultural organisations, professional artists, and cultural workers across a wide range of art forms and disciplines. Applications are currently open for the following funding rounds: project funding for individuals and groups, creative query project funding for organisations, and annual program funding for organisations. The guidelines for these grants and more webinars can be found on the Create New South website. Today, I'm joined by two representatives from Milk Crate Theatre, an arts organisation working in the unique intersection of the arts, homelessness, mental health and disability, providing professional development pathways and opportunities for collaborative artists to engage in creative practices. My first guest is Milk Crate Artistic Director Margot Politis. Hi Margot, thank you for sharing your experience and joining us today. Firstly, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organisation?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Margot. Thank you for having us today. My practice has just over 20 years been mostly working in arts and disability, so mostly in dance and movement, but also theatre, and formulating accessibility methodology within artistic practice, and a real focus on offering access to artistic practice for people who may not necessarily get that access in a mainstream way.
Thank you so much, Margot. And next we have Milk Crate Theatre CEO Jodie Wainwright. Thank you so much for joining us, Jodie. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Milk Crate Theatre?
Yeah, hi Kat, thanks for having us. I am CEO. I suppose my role at Milk Crate Theatre is more of the business side. So I look at funding and structure and organisational strategy to make sure we can continue to exist into the future. So it's a really good match sitting alongside Margot, who leads our creative team, and I get to look at the numbers and make sure things work.
What a lovely partnership. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Sorry, and I forgot to show your bio, Jodie. There we go. There's a bit more about Jodie. So Milk Crate received funding for the project Dust Storm. Can you tell us a little bit more about the project?
Yeah, so we ended up changing the name to just Dust. But that was a project that took place over a number of years. So because of the COVID lockdowns, we started conducting workshops online. And as we were working together over that long period of time, we started developing a whole world for these characters that we were building. And essentially because, everything that we perform is made by our collaborative artists and co-designed with everybody, it made perfect sense for us to turn that into our next major work for the company. So that's how it happened.
Great. And how did you address the area of people with disability in your application? How did you talk about that?
Yeah, well, as an organisation, accessibility really is at the fore. It's the core of everything that we do. And so it's quite natural to talk about in a grant application. But for the most part, we consider, the main tenets of accessibility, such as physical accessibility, using plain English, and in terms of artistic direction and artistic practice, what that means for us is really layered information, really structured processes, a lot of repetition and reliability of a rehearsal session will look the same every week, for example, and lots of ways of working like that make our programs accessible for people to take part in and also for audiences to connect to. We also are really conscious of how long we take for a project, which might be longer than another theatre company working with people who are mostly neurotypical. So we take a few months to develop a show ready for production and things like that. And we highlight all of those aspects of our process in our applications.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of which, how do you go about preparing your application? What's your process and how do you sort of find that experience yourselves?
Yeah, I think our application process, like everything we do, is very collaborative. So we start early and we pull down the application, look at all the questions and kind of divide and conquer. So anything that is more creative is Margot's realm. And then working with me around the impact, the financial side is me. So we will pull that all together. We work in a Word document. We never type anything directly into the Smarty Grants and have that document on a SharePoint, and then I suppose all add things and then give ourselves time to edit and refine to make sure we've got a really sharp application that reads like one person wrote it at the end, even though many people will have had hands in it.
Great. So yeah, divide and conquer, collaborate, use a Word document.
Give yourself time.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's really great. Okay, well, speaking of time in the application, we've sort of broken it down into the three main parts of a grant application. So starting with project merit, one of the major components of your application, the way that we assess applications. Can you provide any hints on how to best describe a project with a focus on presenting a strong rationale?
For me, when I start writing creatively about a project, I really consider the theme of what the project is. And also at Milk Crate Theatre, we don't use people's personal stories of difficulty or challenge to create work. We start with an idea or a theme or an art form. So I'd always talk about that, where the idea has come from also. And then creatively speaking, for me and the way that we work at Milk Crate is always coming back to the why. Why is really important. So why do we want to look at this theme? Why do we want to look at this topic? Why do we want to make this work? Why now? And really considering the importance of this work. And it doesn't mean it has to be changing the whole world. It could be really important to you as an individual. It's important that you make this work now because it's the logical next step in your career and it's really important for you to step up. Or it could be the impact is a bit further reaching for your community. It's important. There is an issue that needs to be addressed right now within the community of which you are a part. And I think for me, really emphasizing all of those points about the artistic idea really gives it strength and a backbone, and it gives it purpose.
That's great. Thank you. And how did you describe your practice as an arts organisation who works and collaborates with people living with disability? How did you describe the arts practice of working with people with disability?
Yeah, so we talk about the way that we start developing a work. So as I mentioned, we're not using people's personal stories and hacking it to make exciting theatre. We talk about our belief in all people to possess creativity, like creativity. Everybody has something to tell. Our lived experiences will come through our stories, whether we choose for that to happen or not. And that's okay. But we really talk about everybody's right to access the arts, everybody's right to have a platform to express their feelings and their art and their ideas and opinions. And so for us, that's kind of the core of our accessibility methodology, is that everybody has a right to be here. You don't have to have gone to a fancy acting school to claim a space on stage or to have your voice heard. We talk about that a lot. And then, yeah, like I mentioned as well, we work in a lot of different art forms. So you can come to a creative process as a writer, as a mover, as a visual artist, and we play with lots of different art forms and ideas to make the work that we make. So I really just list all of those things in my application in a rationale.
Yeah, great. And what sort of support material did you include in your application? And do you have any tips on collating support material to evidence claims in your application?
Yeah, I suppose support material we've really, I suppose, was quite extensive for this project. But what we find, and I'm sure everyone finds, in the applications, you have a really tight word count. So you can't explain everything in your application. So quite often you'll reference things in your methodology or practice or about your organisation that you don't have space to explain. So what we've really done with the support material now is built some succinct pieces of material that we can pull together that explain our org, our practice, and any of those relevant methodologies, so we can attach that. So when you're reading that and you're like, oh, I want to know more, what does this mean? That information is readily accessible. We always do bios. We work with non-typical cast and crew. So we work really strongly with our collaborative artists to build their bios out so they have a place in the project. So we have a lot of parity and equity there. And in terms of, I think where we've got now with our support material, give yourself enough time to make it look good. So when they open it, it's really accessible. The information's really clear. You've got lots of images. It's exciting. Yeah, anything about your theme and project, any research you've done, we'll bring that through. So yeah, usually we use that kind of 10 pages really intelligently to attach something that covers all those areas. We also always attach support letters. So we would usually get support letters from sector, but also build that out with support letter from community partners if we've got any. So it's a well-rounded package of support letters that's evidence the need for the project.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, moving on now to project impact. Can you share how you describe the outcomes of your project? Usually when we talk about outcomes, we're talking about engagement, audience numbers, diversity, inclusion strategies. How did you describe those?
Yeah, so in terms of the outcomes of the project, I think we start with a bit of a list around what we intend to produce. So, some of that will be we're going to develop a new work, we're going to have 8 shows. Then that extrapolates out to, when you've got your venue, if it's 100 people per show, that's 800 people audience. We think there's about 60%. We do a lot of maths there to work out those. Those numbers are pretty easy. Our diversity and inclusion, not diverting anyone, is pretty inherent in our project. So we do have the stats around our core team and any kind of diversity that we've got there that we can build into the project, but also in terms of our selection of cast and crew, we have that built in as well. We also work, being a social impact driven organisation, we work within a social impact framework and have a whole framework sitting behind our measurement of success. So we have a framework as an organisation with 12 domains that have a number of criteria against them. So when we look at a project, we refer back to our organisational methodology and look at which areas this project is delivering on and pull those out. That's not something that everyone as an individual artist, we understand not everyone is going to have that. But I think in terms of your outcomes, particularly if you're looking at the social outcomes, it doesn't have to be overly complex. Quite often you know what you're doing and the impacts you're having. So then you just need to reverse engineer and think back, well, how do I measure that? So if it's around access for people with disability, how many people with disability are engaging with the work? You just need to add that into your audience survey. So, there's ways to reverse engineer to get this information if you think about it up front. So I would suggest in terms of really think about what you're trying to achieve and then look at how you measure that before you start the project.
And on that note, I think that's such a good point, because when you provide yourself a list of things you want to achieve, whether that's in impact or audience or artistic engagement, you have that to keep referring back to every time you're rewriting your grant application, or even as you start going into rehearsals or start putting things together, having that core list, why? What was the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? To come back to that list is really, really helpful.
And you were sort of mentioning there ways that you measure impact. Are there other ways that you measure impact and sort of, I suppose, show you're working in your application there?
Yeah, so as an organisation, we have a quite complex impact measurement, but I suppose in terms of the methodologies and the tools, so we are doing pretty standard surveying that everyone works out, but then we do a lot of case studies, interviews. We always do behind the scenes, so we get a lot of evidence and direct information from participants and audience. So we're quite inclusive in how we collect that feedback and evidence of success around our project as well. Our projects are probably a little bit different in terms of, yes, we are producing art and we do want people to come and see it, but we are led by the social impact. So we're not always looking at paid tickets. So we have a whole strategy around engaging non-traditional arts audiences from different backgrounds in our work. And that's really important to us. So, we are collecting data that is specific to that.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so regarding project viability, do you have any tips for preparing a strong and transparent budget?
Yes. I suppose in terms of, we always work to a break-even budget, and we are not necessarily an organisation that relies on ticket income. So we are really looking at either government or philanthropic support generally for a project. We calculate, so have quite complex spreadsheets now. We've got a spreadsheet that we use pretty consistently to calculate out staff costs, all on an hourly rate. And that helps us really have that parity and equity for our collaborative artists versus professional artists that we might bring in to support a project. We make sure we include everyone. And I think that this is really important in terms of really working through that process and understanding the costs of your project and not underestimating costs. So in terms of that, we will calculate Margot's hours into a project, admin hours into a project, really going to that level of detail so we understand as an organisation what the full cost is. We do probably have a more, even though the Create New South Wales template is quite detailed, we probably have an even more detailed spreadsheet of our own behind that. And then we just work that into the Create New South Wales template. So we use our own experience and knowledge to build out our budgets, how we always do, and cost that in. 80% of costs on any project we do are people, because that's the type of organisation we are. So it is really important to really work through, and the timeline, the project timeline, what hours all those people need to contribute to the project and what their hourly rate is.
Mm. And it sounds like you're taking a very detailed approach to our budget, so being very specific about exactly where each line item comes from, and then transferring that over to the Create New South Wales budget so that assessors can see very clearly and in a lot of detail where all the money is going.
Exactly. And I think it's, even in terms of our commentary, we put in hours, an hourly rate. It's very detailed in terms of where the money's going. And I think that is important also to show that money is going to community artists who are participating on the project. So we really break that down so it is quite clear that there is that equity and parity. So it's not just about viability in terms of a budget, it's really about showing where the money goes. And I think that for an organisation like ours, but also anyone working in this space, making sure that there is the right amount of funding going to those people that are working on the project, regardless of their ability, is really important.
Thank you. And how did access and inclusion impact the way that you had to plan your budget?
Yeah, so I think, and I think that this is interesting in terms of our budget. As Margot said earlier, our projects are longer, but we also have a lot more support in the space. So I think it's really important upfront to explain your methodology. So when people get to your budget and they can see the line items for support artists, social workers, and things that you wouldn't see on a traditional show, they understand why they're there. But I do think in terms of this, accessibility is not cheap. So, but I think it is really important to have it included and for people to start seeing those budget lines more frequently, because then I think the peer assessment team gets used to seeing those budget lines and starts expecting them. We always have budget for Auslan interpretation, audio description, any other accessibility in terms of the performance written into our budget. So that's just a standard, but also, as I said, the social worker, the support artist that enables the people on the ground to create and participate in the work.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much. I really love the way too that you spoke about creating a really cohesive grant application by explaining what access and inclusivity needs are from the very start. And so then when you get to the budget, everything makes sense.
Yeah,
that's really great. Thank you. Okay, so are there any last tips that we could offer the sector, or that maybe you can share some practical advice that may have helped you at the start of your journey?
First one, and I think we already said it, but start early. Don't do your grant at the last minute. I think as well, and this is a really important one, write your grant about a project that you want to do and you've already conceived. Don't come up with a project just to meet a grant. So I think if you do that, then it will become clear as you're writing it that the project's not as well thought out as it should be in the application. So yeah, I always am a big proponent of don't make up projects to meet funding. Use the funding to fund the projects you want to do. Time management, give yourself time. Have someone external read it at the end and tell you if it makes sense. So when you're really close to the work, I think it can be really easy to maybe use some jargon or not fully explain things, because you know in your head what it means, but on paper it might not be fully explained. So having someone who's external read it and say, what does this mean, is quite invaluable. use everyday language. We really try not to use a lot of jargon and, we don't thesaurus our applications. So we try to make it really, the application accessible for everyday people. Anything from?
Yeah, I think from an artistic and creative point of view, I think feel confident, like remind yourself that you're having this inspiration for a reason, and believe in yourself that you want to express this art for a reason, and it is valid, and you have the right to be expressing this idea or this impulse that you have inside you, and use that sense of passion and that excitement for your project to write the description, to write about your ideas, and to write about why it needs to happen. Even for your first draft, just write it all out in any words you want to use all the expressive, gorgeous, juicy words that, come straight out of you. And then you can do a little bit of an edit to pull it back to make it a little bit more formal. But just trust your creative intuition. It's here for a reason. You're an artist. You have the right to express. Believe in yourself and believe that you have the right to access funding for your project. And I think that will give you a lot of strength to complete your application. And also, I think managing expectations around if you're not successful in your application, it doesn't mean that you wrote a bad application. It doesn't mean that you're a terrible artist and you should give up. Yeah. Call for feedback and get feedback if you can, and just keep trying, keep going.
Yeah. I think as well, there is support out there. So in terms of, I know Accessible Arts runs brilliant support services there, but lots of other support in the sector. Even if it is just getting a peer to read your application.
So on the screen, there are some methods for connecting with Milk Crate Theatre. And Margot and Jodie, thank you so much again for all of your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
My pleasure. So should you have any questions about Create New South Wales Arts and Culture funding rounds, you can contact the funding team via the methods on the screen. And we hope that you found this valuable, and thank you for joining this Create Connect information session.